You know those parts of yourself you kinda can't stand? That inner critic that's always nagging you, or the part that procrastinates when you have a deadline? Well, what if I told you that none of those parts are actually bad? Today, we're diving into a really powerful idea from Richard Schwartz's book, No Bad Parts, and it offers a whole new way to think about our inner world. So, let's start with this beautiful quote from the writer Thomas Merton. He's talking about this deep, universal hope, right? The idea that if we could just see the secret, hidden beauty inside of everyone, all our conflicts would just dissolve. It's an incredible vision for peace in the world. But let's be real. As wonderful as that sounds, it's often way harder to see that beauty in ourselves. I mean, what are we supposed to do with our own inner critic, our own anger, the parts of us that feel shamed or just plain lazy? How do we square Merton's incredible vision with our own, messy internal reality? Well, it turns out the source of all this inner conflict, this war that we all feel inside, it really comes from a huge misunderstanding about how our minds actually work. It's something Schwartz calls the one-mind myth. See, most of us grew up soaking in this idea that you have one single unified mind, a monomind. And if you believe that, then it seems logical that you should be in total control of it, right? All the time. And that one little belief has massive consequences. The goal becomes self-control through sheer willpower. We're told to just discipline ourselves, to crush those bad impulses. But what's the actual result? Well, we end up in a constant battle with ourselves. And that leads to shame, burnout, and this nagging feeling that we're failing, that something is just wrong with us. And listen, this is not a new idea. It has really deep roots in Western culture. Theologian John Calvin wrote about this idea of total depravity, the belief that our nature is basically sinful and has to be tamed. That kind of thinking has been shaping our world for centuries, telling us there's a bad part of us that needs to be fixed or controlled. But what if that entire premise is just wrong? And this brings us to the really radical new idea at the heart of a psychological model called internal family systems, or IFS for short. So here's the absolute game changer. What if those parts of you that you can't stand, the anxious part, the angry part, the procrastinating part, what if they aren't actually bad? What if they're all good parts that have been forced into these extreme, often painful roles because they're trying to protect you? The IFS model suggests that underneath all the noise and the chaos of these different parts, there is a core you, a calm, compassionate, wise center that is completely undamaged. This is your true self. And it's not something you have to build or earn. It's already there, just waiting to be accessed. So how do you know when you're in touch with this self? Well, it has these really distinct qualities, often called the 8 C's. When you're connected to yourself, you feel calm. You feel genuinely curious about things, not judgmental. You feel compassion and confidence. You find you have access to courage, clarity, a sense of connectedness to others, and your natural creativity. This isn't some superhuman state, it's your natural state. Okay, so if we have this calm, wise self at our core, who are all those other characters making so much noise in our heads? Let's meet the members of your internal family. First, we have the exiles. Think of these as our wounded inner children. They're the young, sensitive parts of us that are holding on to the pain from past hurts, shame, or trauma. And because their feelings are so overwhelming, we often lock them away in an internal basement to protect the whole system from their pain. Now, to keep those exiles safely locked away, we develop managers. These are our protectors, the parts that work 24/7 to manage our lives and keep everything under control. Your inner critic, that's a manager, trying to make you perfect so you'll never feel the pain of criticism again. That part of you that's a workaholic, that's a manager, trying to achieve success so you'll never feel worthless. But sometimes, despite the manager's best efforts, an exile's pain breaks through. And when that emergency happens, a second type of protector rushes in, the firefighters. Their one and only job is to put out the emotional fire, immediately, no matter the cost. This is where our most impulsive behaviors come from. Binge watching a whole season of a show, overeating, lashing out in anger. They're not trying to be destructive. They're just desperately trying to numb the pain. So if you look at their motivations, you can see how different they are, even though they're all trying to help. The exiles just want to be seen and healed. They're terrified of being forgotten. The managers are all about prevention. Their biggest fear is chaos and having an exile get triggered. And the firefighters, they're pure reaction. They're terrified of the exile's feelings and will do anything to shut them down, right now. Okay, I know this can all sound a bit theoretical, so let's make it concrete. Let's look at a real-world example from the book about a man named Sam to see how this all plays out. The healing process in IFS follows a pretty clear path. First, you learn to access that core self we talked about. From that calm, curious place, you start to befriend your protectors, your managers and firefighters. You listen to what they're afraid of, and you get their permission to approach the exile they're protecting. Then you simply witness the exile's story with compassion. And finally, you help that young part release the burdens it's been carrying for so long. So, Sam had this really strong, tough guy manager. This part of him believed it had to run a tight ship and control everything. And why? Because it was protecting a young, exiled part from when he was a teenager, a part that carried this deep shame and weakness from being bullied. The tough guy's whole job was to make sure Sam never, ever felt that weakness again. But by connecting with his own core self, Sam was able to approach that wounded teenage part not with judgment, but with love and compassion, almost like a good father. He just listened. He helped it release all that old pain. And guess what happened to the tough guy manager? It didn't have to run such a tight ship anymore. It could finally relax and take on a new, healthier, more creative role in Sam's life. And this is so important. This kind of healing work, it doesn't just stay inside of us. It has these incredible ripple effects for how we show up in the world. It really boils down to this incredibly powerful idea. If you are at war with parts of yourself, if you're trying to shame them or control them or exile them, that's exactly what you'll do to other people. But if you can learn to approach your own inner parts with curiosity and compassion, that becomes your natural way of being with everyone. And this creates two totally different blueprints for a society. On one hand, you have a society based on what's called veneer theory, that old idea that people are secretly selfish, and goodness is just a thin layer on top. That belief leads to systems built on control, competition, and us versus them thinking. But a self-led society is built on the opposite belief, that everyone has a core of goodness, and that allows for systems built on trust, collaboration, and real compassion. And that really brings us to the final and maybe most important question. This isn't just a theory, it's a practice. It starts right inside each of us. So, what could change? In your life, in your relationships, maybe even in the world, if you just decided to get curious and start a gentle conversation with one of your parts today.